So let's just take a closer look at Lebanon's current political system. The country is governed by a power-sharing agreement known as the Taif Accords. It was designed after the end of the civil war to redistribute power. So the number of seats in parliament is equally split between Christians and Muslims. The president must be a Christian and the parliament speaker a Shia. The prime minister must be Sunni. So the current system has been challenged in recent weeks by hundreds of thousands of protesters who say it's riddled with corruption. Let's bring in Marwan Bishara. He's Aljazeera senior political analyst. He's joining us from London. Marwan, so the Taif Accord is credited with ending the civil war in Lebanon, yet many say it is really the basis of all the problems. It is the basis of sectarianism, where politicians work to benefit their sect rather than work for the benefit of the country. So one of their demands is to dismantle this system. How challenging, though, is that going to be?
Well, yes, this is the generation that came after the Taif Accord of 1989. That was 30 years ago. The accords were perhaps necessary, perhaps not, but perhaps necessary in order to end the war and for the fighting factions within the country to have some peace. But 30 years later, clearly a new generation of Lebanese wants something else, doesn't want sects to divide the pies among them. They want a state of citizens within the country. And that's why I think the idea of a government of technocrat is a good first step, because a lot of the nepotism and the corruption goes through the ministries that are dividing the pies among them. They are hiring their own people, sometimes their own co-religionists, and they are the ones who are giving out investments and contracts and so on and so forth to those who are closer to them. So the idea that the state has been divided among the sects could start diminishing with more of a government of a technocrat. But that's only a very, very first step. Lebanon is going to need far more radical, far more deep changes in order for that sectarian regime to change into something better.
And this idea of a technocratic government, how does it actually work going forward? Now that you have the prime minister's resignation, what happens then? Because we have seen the president, for example, oppose this idea of a technocratic government. Absolutely,
because they know that their source of power is the government. The president and his son-in-law, just like Hezbollah and other sectarian leaders within the country, do understand that state power is somehow trickles down to their own, because they have, since 1989, divided the pie amongst themselves as various political parties based on sectarian allegiances. And so, in a sense, the Hezbollah and the president have stood against radical change within the government because they like the existing regime, because the existing regime serves their interest. And that's why, looking forward, there could be some optimism that 13 days later the government has failed. But there's a lot of work needs to be done, because reform in a country like Lebanon is going to have to be slow and patient, and any radical change that might lead to violence could end up diminishing the entire optimism that we face today. So dealing with the power centers in the country, notably Hezbollah and the presidency, is going to have to be quite meticulous and quite patient.
Are the protesters, though, willing to deal with this slowly and patiently?
Well, it remains to be seen. For the time being, I mean, they've been actually one of the more industrious and wonderful, I must add, uprisings out there in the Arab world. It reminds me of the early days of the Egyptian revolution. Very positive, very, gay, as they say in French, very open, and, with only the Lebanese flags out there, not sectarian flags, not religious flags, not smaller identities. So it seems like the various new generations of Lebanese from the various religions have united along or around the Lebanese identity at last, and they see that as their way forward. So the problem with it is that they know what they want and they know what they're against, but they have not articulated a vision and a common united leadership for the street, one that could, in fact, negotiate, one that could, in fact, run for elections and so on and so forth. So for the time being, their best goal, their best possible way forward is to continue the pressure on the existing regime to reform itself and to open the way for more fair election law, for more independent judiciary, and for a government of technocrats that allows that kind of mechanism to move forward.
And how do you see the protesters maintaining that pressure? We've seen them out on the streets for 13 days, but earlier, a couple of hours ago, there was talk that the security forces might try to break up the roadblocks because people do need to get to shops and people need to get back to their jobs. So what do the protesters do next? Is there a strategy?
Well, we don't know, as I said, of a united leadership for the streets, and it's been improvising for a long while now. And its improvisation is both a source of strength and weakness. Unfortunately for the street, meaning the various people from the various parts of the society, is that the opposition to them from the sectarian elites, notably from Hezbollah and the president's party, is that they are well organized, and in the case of Hezbollah, also supported regionally by Iran and others. And they do have a program, and they consider any change for the status quo as one that is of a Western conspiracy against Lebanon. And that is very unfortunate, of course. But those in Hezbollah and the presidency do consider any fundamental change called upon by the street to be a conspiracy. And hence, I'm afraid, as they did today earlier when a bunch of thugs went into the street and started to break various protests, that this might continue in different ways, despite the fact that the head of Hezbollah, in his last speech, asked his followers from Hezbollah to clear out of the public squares. And yet apparently secretly or implicitly, they're sending out those thugs in order, or there's activists, let me call them, so I don't sound editorializing in any which way. The activists of the various groups like Hezbollah are going down the streets. And one of the worst case scenarios in Lebanon, if, as Hezbollah leader said, will be one street against another street. We've seen that after the assassination of Taif Hariri between the so-called March 7 and March 14 movement. That paralyzed the country. We don't want to see, the Lebanese don't want to see Lebanon paralyzed. It wants to see it moving forward. So certainly it wants to avoid at every possible cost a street against a street against an organized political party that does not want change in Lebanon.
All right, Marwan Bishara, thank you.